I'm happy to be speaking with Dr. Shelly Skinner, an associate professor at Messiah College, who will be teaching an elective course here at the seminary during term 3. Dr. Skinner, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a native Southern Californian, so words like dude and gnarly are in my vocabulary.
Awesome.
I've been here at Messiah. This is my 8th academic year, so I feel like I can shovel snow a little bit more strategically than when I started here. I still love California. I have family and friends that are there, so I do visit when I get a chance. And I also take students on a domestic cross-cultural experience service learning course in Southern California during J term. So I do keep my California ties there.
That's great. It is a whole different culture out there.
Yes, very much
as
so.
opposed to Pennsylvania.
Exactly. One of the things that I noticed right away, my clothes were brighter. So I would be sitting in a meeting, maybe I would be wearing a navy blue suit or something with a bright pink blouse, and everybody around me was wearing sage and very muted tones, and so I noticed that. My background in terms of ministry, I think that would be relevant for the students who take this course. I started in ministry right out of high school, but I also came from a ministry family, so I thought everyone was involved in ministry in some shape or form. Youth ministry was my primary role in my last full-time church location in Southern California, but I've also led, in addition to Youth Men, a senior citizens ministry, and at the other end of the spectrum.
Yes, exactly. Definitely different.
Yes. And then at the church location I was at in Southern California, there was also a private school from preschool to 8th grade. And I worked quite a bit with them, from chapels to missions experiences to connecting on student trips, trying to help families connect who didn't have a church home, for example. So my ministry, probably the oldest volunteer I've worked with is 93 years old. In ministry, and the youngest, probably a preschooler, would probably be the youngest in terms of volunteer work. So
definitely a wide age range.
Yes, very much so. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an indication of my background. I don't know if you want to know educational kinds of things as well, or what would be helpful.
You can tell a little bit about as far as your education. Yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay, sure. So I'm an undergrad from Biola University in California, and then I went to Talbot Seminary, which is on the same campus, and then Southern Seminary in the Midwest, and focused my dissertation on youth and young adults, primarily young adults, really, from that 18, 19 years to about 23, and looked at faith formation. I feel like as we walk alongside students, whether they're junior high, high school, or young adults, that we really need to connect in how their faith forms. And so that's what I explored during my doctoral work. So, yeah.
Great. So you have a great interest, as you've mentioned, in youth worker training. What is some of your work in that area?
Sure. Well, I feel like, first of all, anybody in ministry needs to be a lifelong learner. I always want to be a person that's open to learning how to be more effective and strategic, whether that's connecting with people or in terms of strategy or planning, something like that. So a couple of weeks ago, myself and a biopsych professor from Messiah led a training for some local youth workers in Hershey, Pennsylvania, on mental health and student ministry. And so she spent the majority of the time talking about issues of mental health like anxiety or depression or self-harm. And it was very interesting to hear just kind of what happens in your body, your physical body, when you experience those kinds of things. And then myself and a local youth worker finished off the training with some next steps for youth workers. So things like, how do I train my volunteer team to deal with things that come up in a small group, or you're in a van with students and students tend to blurt things out, and what do I do with that? Yeah. And then talk a little bit about networking and how other people in other fields can be a resource to us. So I talked a little bit about my own experience in California, networking with social workers and law enforcement and psychologists to really inform our ministry and figure out what our role is. So we're trained as youth workers, but we're not trained, for example, as a psychologist.
Right.
But we can walk alongside when appropriate. And so if you take any of my ministry courses, you will hear over and over, what's your role? Know your role and stay within that role. But there are lots of resources around that can help us be more effective and walk alongside students.
Yes.
And then one other aspect about training. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Well, you can be a conduit as far as a lot of times youth will confide in you, and then you can guide them to get the appropriate help or assistance they need.
Yes, that's an excellent analogy, because we really can be people who connect and resource students and families, and again, walk alongside in the role that's appropriate that we are trained for. So in addition to that, myself and the other ministry colleague here at Messiah, we're working on a youth worker and student leader training that will happen in March. And hopefully the details of that I'll be able to mention in the class this spring semester to let them know as an option. So as you mentioned, training really helps us grow and deepen, helps us to be more effective. It also gives us a sense that there are more people than just me dealing with these kinds of issues. And I find that very comforting and encouraging that I'm not alone in that.
You've mentioned the course that you'll be teaching. What is the name of it and what is it about?
Yes. So youth ministry practice is really my area of passion. So the title reflects that, I think, the nuts and bolts of youth ministry practice. And we're going to talk about lots of different things like soul care. How do I take care of myself in the midst of ministry? We'll talk about goal setting and strategic plans, and how do I actually evaluate my ministry so I'm effective, and what are the things that are going well, and what are the things that we need to do more effectively overall. So we'll talk a lot about that. One phrase that you'll hear from me quite a bit is ministry is an overflow of what God is doing in our life. And sometimes I find people in ministry, whether it's youth ministry or another aspect of ministry, they equate their relationship with God with their ministry. And what I really try to hone in on is actually, I'm a child of God first, and then God gifts me in ministry. That's an overflow, and it's important to keep those distinctives there. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a tease. Would it be helpful to see the text that we use? I could show a quick sample of that.
Sure.
Sure. So we're going to look at 3 different texts. The first one is the Doug Fields text, The First 2 Years in Youth Ministry. And this is one of those texts that you keep on your shelf and you refer back to. It talks about lots of different kinds of things, like working with your boss, whether that be a pastor or a parachurch or a nonprofit director, working through conflict or volunteer teams. So lots of different topics in your first 2 years of youth ministry. Then we'll be looking at actually a secular book called iGen by Twangy, and it looks like Twinge, but it's pronounced Twangy. And she's done a fantastic job of researching youth and particularly young adults as well, and just looking at the iGen generation. And I think that really informs our ministry. I do have current students who are juniors and seniors in college that fit, they're kind of on the tail end of millennials. They still have characteristics of millennials. So I also think this text is helpful too. And it's called You Lost Me from Kinnaman. And he talks about why young adults connect or don't connect to the church. And I have found some crossover. Obviously, there's different characteristics of the different generations, but I found that book to be very helpful and insightful as well. So looking forward to that. Of course, there'll be other texts that I recommend for supplemental reading, but those will be our 3 main texts.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today, and thank you all for watching.